LeBron James is no longer a Laker. Jaylen Brown is no longer a Celtic. And Joel Embiid finally has another superstar next to him. But here's the real question. Did Philadelphia just build the most dangerous team in the NBA, or did they create a lineup that looks better on paper than it will on the court? Philadelphia, a city that hasn't lifted the Larry O'Brien Trophy since 1983. A city that has watched star after star walk through its doors, promise the world, and leave with nothing but heartbreak behind them. And now, in the summer of 2026, something happened that nobody saw coming. Something so big, so strange, that even the players involved couldn't believe it themselves. The greatest player of his generation walked away from the bright lights of Los Angeles. A former Finals MVP got a phone call that made him throw his own phone across the room. And a 7-foot center who has spent his whole career being told his body would never hold up, suddenly had a reason to believe again. 3 superstars. 1 city. 1 impossible dream. This is the story of how Philadelphia built a super team almost nobody expected. And the question everyone in basketball is now asking. Can they actually win it all? Let's rewind for a second, back to the spring of 2026. The Philadelphia 76ers were in trouble. Joel Embiid, their franchise centerpiece, was hurt again. It felt like a script that had played out too many times before. Knee problems. An oblique strain. Then, right before the playoffs even started, disaster struck one more time. He needed emergency surgery for appendicitis. Just days after going under the knife, Embiid was forced to watch his team fight for its playoff life without him. Imagine that feeling. You're a former MVP, one of the most dominant big men the league has ever seen, and your own body keeps betraying you at the worst possible moments. Fans in Philadelphia had grown tired of hearing the same story on repeat. Hope, then heartbreak. Hope, then heartbreak. The Sixers were eliminated in the second round, swept away, and the questions about the future of the franchise grew louder than ever. But here's the twist nobody expected. Sometimes the darkest moment right before something completely changes everything. Because while Embiid was recovering that summer, something strange was happening behind the scenes. Word started spreading that his surgery this time was different. No procedure. No setbacks. Just rest, rehab, and for the first time in years, an actual healthy offseason. His own team started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the version of Embiid they signed years ago, the unstoppable force who could dominate any game he stepped onto, was finally about to show up healthy for a real chance at a title. And then the basketball world got its first real shockwave. LeBron James. 4-time MVP. 4-time champion. A man who had spent his entire career as the face of whatever franchise he called home. The idea of LeBron leaving the Lakers felt unthinkable to most fans. But in the middle of the summer, reports started to leak. LeBron was exploring his options. He was talking to teams. And one name kept popping up over and over again. Philadelphia. At first, people laughed it off. Why would a legend like LeBron, someone chasing every remaining piece of his legacy, choose to join a franchise that hadn't been to the finals in over 2 decades? But the more the rumors spread, the more real they became. And then it happened. LeBron James signed with the Philadelphia 76ers. Just picture that moment for basketball fans everywhere. The player who had defined an entire era of the sport was now putting on a Sixers jersey. Some called it the biggest bargain in modern sports history, a legend choosing legacy over money, choosing one final shot at glory over comfort. Philadelphia, a city that had been starving for hope, suddenly had the most decorated player alive walking through their doors. But LeBron alone wasn't enough to convince people this team could actually compete for a championship. Not yet. Because right next to him, they still had Embiid's health question mark hanging over everything. They needed one more piece. Something that could tip the scales completely in their favor. And that's when the story gets even wilder. Up in Boston, tension had been building for months. Jaylen Brown, the 2024 Finals MVP, a 5-time All-Star, a champion, was starting to hear his own name in trade rumors. The Celtics had been exploring a blockbuster deal, trying to bring in a different superstar to reshape their roster. And in doing so, Brown found himself suddenly expendable in the eyes of the front office that once called him a cornerstone. Picture Jaylen Brown's night when the news finally broke. He got the call. Boston, the team that drafted him as a teenager, the team he had bled for, fought for, brought a championship to, had traded him away. Reports say he was so shocked, so overwhelmed, that he threw his phone across the room in disbelief. 10 years of blood, sweat, and loyalty, and just like that, it was over. And where did he end up? Philadelphia. The very rival he had battled dozens of times throughout his career. The team he once viewed as the enemy. In a statement released shortly after, Brown admitted he was feeling two completely different emotions crash into each other at once. Excited and disappointed at the very same time. He talked about everything Boston meant to him, the relationships, the battles, the championship banner that will always have his name attached to it. But now, his future belonged somewhere else entirely. The trade sent shockwaves through the entire league. Boston received Paul George and a package of draft picks in return, closing the book on an era where the Celtics had dominated both the regular season and the playoffs more than any team in the league. And Philadelphia, meanwhile, had just landed a second superstar in the same summer that LeBron James decided to call the city home. Stop and think about what that roster suddenly looked like. Joel Embiid, a former MVP and two-time scoring champion, finally healthy heading into a new season. LeBron James, arguably the greatest all-around player the sport has ever produced. Jaylen Brown, a Finals MVP still in his prime years. Tyrese Maxey, one of the most explosive young scorers in the league. And VJ Edgecombe, a rising rookie sensation who had already turned heads across the entire NBA. Basketball analysts everywhere started calling it one of the most terrifying starting lineups the league had seen in years. Two former MVPs. A Finals MVP. An all-star scorer. And a breakout rookie. On paper, it looked less like a basketball roster and more like an all-star lineup card. But here's where the excitement runs straight into reality. Because building a super team on paper is one thing. Making it actually work on the court is an entirely different challenge. Let's start with the obvious concern. Health. Joel Embiid's career has been defined by two things: jaw-dropping talent and constant, heartbreaking injuries. He has missed hundreds of games over the years. Knees, ankles, illnesses, surgeries, one setback after another. Even with reports of a clean, healthy summer, Philadelphia knows better than anyone that with Embiid, nothing is guaranteed until he's actually out there on the floor, game after game, deep into the postseason when it matters most. Then there's the question of chemistry. Basketball isn't like other sports where you can simply stack talent and expect instant results. It's a game of spacing, rhythm, sacrifice. LeBron James has always been the primary offensive engine wherever he's played. Jaylen Brown is used to being a go-to scorer in crunch time. Tyrese Maxey just had the best season of his career as Philadelphia's leading man. Now you're asking all of these players, established stars with their own habits, their own strengths, their own egos even, to figure out how to share the same basketball, the same shots, the same spotlight. And let's not forget the age factor. LeBron James is entering this next chapter of his career well into his 40s, a stretch of basketball that no player his age has ever truly conquered at a superstar level for a full, grueling 82-game season plus playoffs. Can his body hold up over the marathon of an NBA season? Can Philadelphia manage his minutes carefully enough to have him fresh and dangerous when the games matter most in May and June? But here's the other side of that coin. If this team can figure it out, if Embiid stays on the floor, if these stars find a way to blend their talents instead of colliding, the ceiling for this roster is almost unlike anything we've seen walk into the Eastern Conference in years. Imagine playoff basketball with this group. Imagine a fourth quarter where Embiid is dominating in the post, Maxey is exploding for a scoring run, and then LeBron James, still one of the smartest, most dangerous closers the game has ever seen, takes over when the pressure hits its peak. Imagine Jaylen Brown, a proven champion who has already tasted finals glory, locking down the opposing team's best scorer on defense while still putting up nearly 30 points a night. This isn't just talent for the sake of talent. This is a roster built with championship pedigree stacked on top of championship pedigree. 2 MVPs. A Finals MVP. A team that suddenly has multiple players who know exactly what it feels like to be the best player on the floor in the biggest moments of the season. Around the league, executives, coaches, and analysts are already trying to figure out how anyone stops this group when they're at full strength. The Eastern Conference, already a competitive battlefield, suddenly has a new, terrifying favorite walking through the door. Boston, the team that just gave up its own superstar, will now have to find a way to rebuild while watching their former rival potentially rise to the top. Every other contender in the East now has to draw up a plan specifically designed to slow down this three-headed monster in Philadelphia. And the city itself, a fan base that has endured decades of near misses, of promising rosters that fell apart at the worst possible moment, finally has a reason to dream at the highest level.